for joining us for today's webinar put on by ESHA Research. With the new nutrition fact panel transition in full swing, manufacturers are seeking updated nutrition information from their suppliers. It is a goal of ours to make it easier for our Genesis customers to import updated ingredient information. So today, my colleague Ben will cover importing and updating supplier ingredients using ESHA Port. ESHA Research was established in 1981 with the goal of providing a comprehensive nutrition database with few missing values. Our software solutions include food formulation and labeling software, restaurant menu analysis and labeling software, supplement formulation and labeling software, as well as nutrition and diet analysis software. Our consulting services department can also offer solutions for any of the items mentioned above, should you prefer to outsource that part of your business. Genesis R&D was first released in 1991 and has seen many updates throughout the years. The program can create both old and new labels, as well as help with nutrient and menu analysis, label compliance, recipe formulation, and product development. It can also be a great tool for keeping track of documentation for auditing purposes. Genesis R&D works congruently with ESHA Port, which we will be discussing today. Please keep in mind we have additional webinars coming up. Stay tuned for the buzz on FDA's definition of added sugars. This will be occurring on May 30th at the same time, 11 Pacific Standard Time. We will dive into the draft guidance release that covers many aspects of the added sugar definition, as well as provide any additional information we have gleaned regarding the subject since we last spoke about added sugars. On June 20th, we want to provide you the top 10 Genesis R&D user tips for success. Whether you're new to Genesis or have been working in the system for 20 years, we'd like to share some tips and tricks to help make your job more efficient. If you'd like to register for upcoming webinars, please use the link at the bottom of the PowerPoint slide. So today in our agenda, my friend Ben will talk to you a little bit about ESHA Port for those of you who are unfamiliar with the program. We'll then focus on ESHA Port 4.3, highlighting some of the very useful new features. We'll cover how customers and suppliers can work together to transfer information and save valuable time. And of course, we'll also remind you of the timeline of the new Nutrition Facts panel, which is driving the need for this information transfer. As always, this webinar is open for questions, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. Please note this webinar will be recorded and available on demand on our website after the live session. We will also send out a link via email to view the webinar in the next 24 hours. Please contact us through the webinar today using your GoToWebinar control panel should you have any questions or comments. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Ben to talk to us a little bit more about ESHA Port.
Thank you, Maya. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at ESHA Port now. If you're unfamiliar with ESHA Port is a bulk import and export tool. It imports using text files, and it's built to pull data in from outside resources outside of Genesis or ESHA Port, or with the new system that we have in place that we'll go through in a moment, using the templates that you can create inside of ESHA Port to move data from, say, an ingredient supplier to a manufacturer. We're going to be working with ESHA Port version 4.3 today. ESHA Port 4.3 has been updated to update the interface to look more like what the current versions of Genesis R&D currently look like. All of the controls have been pulled out of the floating windows or out of the window boxes into the ribbon for easier access. And a few of those functions have been renamed to be a little more obvious of exactly what they do. We've added a few new features like advanced labels being able to be exported in ESHA Port now. Also, as I mentioned a few moments ago, the templates that are available to be imported using ESHA Port. We're going to take a look at the movement of data with suppliers, either from a Genesis user to Genesis user standpoint. Genesis users can easily transfer data files amongst other Genesis users. So if an ingredient supplier is using Genesis and their customers that they're selling their ingredients to are also using Genesis. It's very easy, either using the Genesis software itself or using ESHA Port to be able to move data from the ingredient manufacturer to the food manufacturer or the supplier. And then we'll also take a look at if one person is a Genesis user and one is not. We'll take a look at how exactly that will work using our new Excel template. Either from an ingredient supplier fills out the Excel template and sends it to the Genesis user to import in, or the ingredient supplier uses ESHA Port to export data out into that Excel template and then sends it to someone that's not a Genesis user, but still has all those values for the foods that they're supplying. Now we're going to take a look at the Genesis application. We're going to look at a couple of different pieces that are very useful inside of Genesis to make ESHA Port flow a little bit easier and work a little bit better. We're going to take a look at groups, and then we'll take a look at the export ability built into the base of Genesis. So if we go to our database tab and then modify, we can take a look at our groups area here. One of the big pieces that you'll probably want to use, especially as an ingredient supplier, this is really looking at it from an ingredient supplier point of view inside of Genesis, but certainly works for food manufacturers as well. We have two folders that I've created for database groups. We have the stages of development folder and then a companies folder. So in these stages of development, I've created a in development, waiting for QA, complete, and retired group inside of that folder. This allows you to determine what stage of development your items are in. And of course, as an ingredient supplier, you're probably only wanting to send out nutritional values to your customers for items that are complete. You wouldn't want it to send out nutritional values for an item that's waiting for QA. And then the second folder, the companies folder, allows you to organize items based on what companies you're selling items to. So as an ingredient supplier, you can determine company A is buying these specific 20 ingredients from you. So you add those to that group. That way, within ESHA Port, when you do an export, you can select just that group to export out without individually selecting items or exporting one item at a time. Make it just easier on you overall. You also do have the ability to export data instead of in a text format or using ESHA Port. You have the ability in this export all button here to export in a .exl format or an ESHA specific file format. In the export all option, you have the ability to export all user created items, either by item type, recipe, ingredient, advanced label, or food menu. You also select what group you're in. So if you want to export all the items from, say, the completed stage for company A and just recipes, for example, you can do it in that way. The one thing that you'll want to make note of is in this function, you're exporting a recipe as a recipe. So when they receive that item, it will be a recipe as well. They'll have all of the ingredient information. You're not really hiding any proprietary information if that's your goal. There are a couple of ways to do that. The primary way now is to use ESHA Port, which we'll go into in just a moment. And that will be if you're doing it in bulk. If you're just wanting to do one item at a time, you do have the ability inside of Genesis to do that though. So we go ahead and open up a recipe that we've got in place here. Let's open up our sample fruit salad item. If you're wanting to export one ingredient or recipe at a time instead of exporting in bulk, like we had the export all option, under the recipe tab, you can go to export, and then you can export either the recipe or as an ingredient. So the recipe will export the single item with all of the ingredient information underneath it as well. If you export it as an ingredient, it'll take the nutritional values, the ingredient statement, and the allergen statement, basically compact it into an ingredient item type inside of Genesis. So this would be a way we're going to send one item at a time to export that data from being an ingredient supplier to your customers. But again, as I mentioned a moment ago, you're probably not just selling one ingredient, two ingredients to the specific person. You're probably going to sell 20, 30. In that case, we'll want to look at ESHA Port because with that, we have our new templates that allow you to export in bulk. So we're now going to go ahead and close off Genesis and move over into ESHA Port. So again, we're currently looking from an ingredient supplier standpoint using ESHA Port. Of course, when you use the export option to export data from your Genesis database into a file to send to someone that's purchasing your item. So we go to export. We have 3 different ways to export data. You have the create new or from file option. So create new will simply, we go ahead and hit OK to that. It'll allow you all of the different options for an export. You can select what type of item, ingredient, or recipe, so forth that you're exporting out. Select the fields, but of course you're manually selecting these fields if you do a new export. Again, the criteria and then the format option. So this would be if you're wanting to do a brand new export, selecting all of the fields yourself. But we do have our templates as well. We have 3 built-in templates into ESHA Port currently. We have the ESHA ingredient export template, so they'll export all of your ingredients into the specific template we have created. Then we have the ESHA recipe as ingredient export, so that will take all of your recipes and export them with the nutritional values, ingredient statements, and allergen statements as though they are ingredients. This is going to be probably the most important piece for most ingredient suppliers, so we'll go ahead and focus on this one. We're going to do the ESHA recipe as ingredient export template. Make sure that radial button is clicked on and hit OK. This is now going to open up our template of export. So now we have all of the different fields that are selected with this export. And the great part of this template is as you export all of this data out into a text file, once you have that text file sent to someone that's purchasing your items, the manufacturer of the foods that you're selling to them, they can take that template, that text file, open it up with ESHA Port, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. Open it up with ESHA Port, and using one of the templates, import it right back in. So there's no manual entry of data they'll ever have to do with the ingredients that you're supplying them. They simply take that file and import it in. There are a couple things that you will have to take into account though as you're doing this export. You'll want to go into this edit button. Edit will allow you 2 or 3 primary things that you'll want to take a look at. The biggest one is where you're exporting your data to. So we have this export data file. By default, it'll go into the program data folder into a ESHA research specific file. If you wanted to export it to your documents or to your desktop, something along those lines, you can simply click browse. And I've already got a ESHA ingredient export Excel template that I've exported earlier. So you can create a new one here. We've got sample export and hit save that, and it'll create that new file that will then exit out or export out. The document type you will not want to change from these templates as they're already pre-built for the specific document type and fields as well. You won't want to go in and adjust these fields. It is possible to adjust these fields, but you won't want to, as if you adjust any of these, then it won't line up with the import when the food manufacturer receives this template. The selection criteria is probably the second biggest piece of this. By default, it will export all of your records. So if we just hit OK and hit export, I'll export every single recipe that I have in my entire database. But that was, as we were mentioning before, how you go into groups and select the specific groups. If we want to export all of the completed items for company B, we can select those 2 groups, and it will only export items that are in both the completed group and the company B group. You can also select a created or modified date if you wanted to just export items that were modified within the last month. If you're wanting to basically just give this company an updated list of items that you've already sent them one maybe last month, you're sending an updated one this month, you can change that modified date to within the last month. Or same with created date, or you can specify a name as well. So you can check the name and say, you want to say export something that just has cheese in it. You can do that as well. And then our format options area, we have 2 pieces that you'll want to take a look at potentially. You have the decimal places, which goes up to 6. By default, it will export 6 decimal places for all of the nutrient fields you're exporting out. If you want to export just 2 decimal places, you have that control to export whatever you'd like. And then the write mode is another piece you'll maybe want to take a look at potentially. By default, the write mode is set to append. That means that if the text file that you're exporting to already exists, it will find the end of that text file and add the items that you're exporting to the end of it. So those items will stay intact and be left. If you'd prefer to just completely overwrite that file and start from the beginning, delete everything that exists in that text file and start from the beginning, you choose overwrite as your option, and that will do just that. The right field heading to first row is also an optional piece. I generally do suggest leaving it checked though. That will write all of the different fields that we see here as the first row of our text file. Once we've got all of these things as we would like them to be, I don't have any items in that specific group. Selected the wrong group there. Once we have all the items that we'd like to export out, I'll just do everything in my database. I've only got about 6 recipes in my entire database. We'll just go ahead and hit OK. We can hit execute, and it'll export all of our recipes as ingredients into that text file. Give it just a second to finish up there. And I'll say this is something new in ESHA Port as well for version 4.3. It actually gives you the option to take a look at what was successful and what failed. So we see these 6 ingredients exported out, 1 failed. Now we're going to take a look at what that data looks like once it has exported. So I have a text file, and I also have a Excel spreadsheet available. So I'm going to open up a text file. So we've got a few ingredients that we've exported out here. I don't have the header as the first row. I actually unchecked that when I exported it the first time. So we've got a few ingredients here. If you're wanting to send this data to a Genesis user that's going to import it using ESHA Port, you'll want to simply take this file, send it over, and they'll be able to pull it right in. If you want to be able to read this data a little bit easier, we do also have a pre-built Excel template for this data as well. So I've got all that data into this item. If the ingredient supplier in this chain doesn't use Genesis, doesn't currently own Genesis, this is the template that you'll want to send out to them as a food manufacturer. So you've got the ingredient name, you got all the nutrient values as we go across here. And then as we scroll across, this gives you the option to select the allergens if they exist in a true-false statement, and then alternate names and measurements as well. So all of the fields that are needed within Genesis to really build a complete ingredient. Again, this template is available. This Excel spreadsheet is available. We have posted it inside of this chat or inside of this webinar. We'll also send out a link for this specific spreadsheet once this is over as well. Now, kind of transitioning over to from the point of view of a food manufacturer receiving information from an ingredient supplier. If your ingredient supplier doesn't own Genesis, you sent them this template, they sent you this exact item back. So we've got all of this information from our ingredient supplier that we're ready to now pull into Genesis. There is one thing you will have to do with your spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet file isn't necessarily importable as it sits into using ESHA Port into the Genesis database, but it is easy to convert that over using Excel. So if we go to File inside of Excel, we now have an export option in Excel, and you can change the file type. And you'll want to choose text, tab delimited, and then just save this item. So it will then convert this from a Excel XLSX file structure to text that can be imported directly into ESHA Port. So it's a very easy process, but you will need to make sure that you do that before you're able to import it into ESHA Port. If you're getting your information from an ingredient supplier that sent you a direct export out of ESHA Port, so it's already in the text format, we can now go right back into ESHA Port. I'm going to close out this export, and we'll just want to select import from template, and we'll want to select the template that they use, which is the ingredient import template. We hit OK. You will see this message every time you select this. It's not necessarily an error as much as it's saying you need to select a correct file to be able to import in. So you hit OK here. And now I can go into my desktop and select sample export or my ESHA ingredient import. Either of these files would work, because as I've exported both of these from ESHA Port. We hit open. We now have the import available to be imported in. Again, we may or may not need to go into this edit menu. It depends a little bit on how they'd export it out. 99% of the time it's going to be as default though, so you'll be able to just import straight in, but you may want to open the text file just to confirm that the first row does in fact have the names of the header fields and isn't just an ingredient. If it's an ingredient, you can uncheck that ignore first row checkbox to make sure that ingredient gets imported and doesn't get ignored. And we'll import right in. I've already done that in the past, so I'm not going to execute this import again. Now we'll go over into Genesis and we'll take a look at exactly what that's going to look like. So we've got our sample fruit salad recipe that I had created in the past, or that comes built into Genesis already. And then we can go to open an ingredient. We can search for sample, and I've got my sample fruit salad ingredient as well. So now we see this item has the exact same quantity and measure serving size as the recipe did. The nutritional values are built into this now. So we've really kind of flattened that recipe into a single ingredient. We now have the ingredient statement typed into the ingredient statement area of our ingredient, instead of having a dynamic ingredient statement that's built by the application. And of course, allergens are imported as well. This recipe had milk and tree nuts, so now we pull across the allergens into that new import. We're now going to go back into ESHA Port. There's a few things kind of outside of the ingredient supplier manufacturer connection that we've changed for version 4.3 as well. I mentioned earlier, but we did move all of the buttons. We see at the bottom area here, if you're used to using ESHA Port in the past, you would expect a bunch of buttons at the bottom down here. All of that has been moved up into our ribbon now. So you've got import and export, saving the templates, which would mean saving the ESHA Port file as the settings, closing the specific import or export. Execute is to actually run the import or export. It used to say import, I believe, but it's a little confusing terminology, so we changed it to execute just to know that you're actually running the import or export now. And then of course, edit brings you back up. We've hit that a couple of times already today. Brings us back into the actual settings of the import and export. I'm going to close this and do a new export so we can take a look at a few of the other changes that have been made. Create a new one here. You do have the option I mentioned earlier to do advanced labels now, which is a brand new option within ESHA Port. So you can export all of your advanced labels, or of course, just like any other export, select your criteria if you have them grouped up within the groups of the Genesis database. Or going into our recipe, if you choose the label analysis of the export operation, there is a new checkbox under the nutrition facts panel area here that says include label image. Instead of in the past, in the selected fields, you had the option under label, so go over here, to select the nutrition facts panel. And that would be the only way you would actually export the label using ESHA Port. We've changed that now. Now under the export options area here, if you check this box, it will include the image. So we'll actually export the image for all of the recipes selected in your export. And then we've changed the selected field. So we go back into selected fields and edit. Into the label area here, we now have nutrition facts image path. That will write the path into the text file that's being exported, but doesn't necessarily control if the label is exported into the folder selected or not. We also have added in 3 different areas here that are statements are user generated, and this is a true false statement. So if you're importing data into your Genesis database using ESHA Port and you're wanting to import a, say, user generated ingredient statement instead of using the application generated one, you'll want to make sure the statements are user generated is selected as true. And then in your next area, you can also select the field of ingredient statement and type in whatever you like as the ingredient statement. I'm not going to be able to demonstrate it here because I don't have an import or export that's going to error on me, but we do allow you to now skip errors within the imports and exports. So if you run into an issue where one of your ingredients name is incorrect or it's formatted wrong or one of the rows is just completely messed up, it will actually continue the export process now, and then at the very end of the export will ask you, or it'll say that there was an error and ask you if you'd like to roll back those changes and cancel the import or export, or if you'd like to just skip that one item but allow everything else to move forward. All right, now moving back over into our slideshow, I'm gonna let Maya take it away for just another couple minutes now.
Thanks, Ben. That was a really great overview of ESHA Port. I know it's technical in nature, has so many very useful tools to import and export data, so that was really awesome. Thank you. So why are we all talking about this, and what's driving the need for sort of this information transfer? Well, let's remember that the timeline for compliance, whether you make 10 million in annual food sales or more, the timeline for those that make 10 million or more will be July 26, 2018. And for those that make less than the 10 million in annual food sales, the timeline for compliance is July 26, 2019. So that is the timeline needed to complete new nutrition facts panels. Okay, sorry about that. We also want to remind you that we have updated, we have multiple training options. So we not only provide these 3 free webinars, but we do provide intensive training. So a couple that we have coming up, we have an advanced Genesis workshop in Las Vegas. That'll be June 22nd and the 23rd. It's around the IFT show, so a good one to hit up then. Genesis professional training will be in Lombard, Illinois, July 18th and 19th. And then another advanced Genesis workshop, September 19th and 20th in Lombard, Illinois. We also offer web-based training as well as on-site training. So if any of those options sound intriguing to you, please email training@esha.com. So we want to open it up to some questions. We've gotten a couple that have come in, so if you have some on your mind, please feel free to type them in. Ben, let's start with something simple. Can you explain sort of what is the difference between a CSV file, text file, and spreadsheet, and how maybe ESHA Port might interact with all 3 of those?
Absolutely. So they're all fairly similar pieces. Just it depends on the depth of the file structure. An Excel file will actually have the ability to do math and different sorts of calculations within itself. Whereas a CSV file or a text file is really simplistic in nature, doesn't have the ability to do math or connect different cells inside of a spreadsheet together. A CSV file and text file are very similar. A CSV file stands for comma separated value. ESHA Port does only work with a text file. You can separate the fields either by commas or by tabs. However you like to do that, by the default is tabs. And within Excel itself, we took a look at that a few moments ago, but I'll take a look at that one more time. Whether you're opening a file in Excel, that is a Excel spreadsheet specific file, a CSV file, or a text file, you do have the ability to convert those items over. So if you have a text file that you'd like to open up in Excel, you can open Excel and go File, Open, and select that text file. Or if you have our template Excel file that we see here, they need to convert to be able to open up inside of ESHA Port. You have the export option within Excel itself to change the file type. So very similar files. ESHA Port does only work with the text file, but they're very similar and they're easy to convert one to the other.
Great. All right, next question. Can you edit the ingredient statement when exporting as an ingredient?
You can adjust it after the fact, but the only ingredient statement that's going to export from ESHA Port is going to be what is built into Genesis currently. It'll export whatever's saved there. So if it's the program generated ingredient statement, or if it's a user generated ingredient statement, whichever one is selected in Genesis is what will export. Or again, if you're wanting to export your ingredient statement after exporting, you could open up that text file that was exported in Excel, modify it, save it, and then send it along to your the manufacturers that are buying your items if you're an ingredient manufacturer.
Great, thanks, Ben. Can you tell us a little bit about how to, or can you automate an import or an export using ESHA Port and Genesis?
Absolutely. ESHA Port can be called from a command line. I don't have that currently on any of my sheets. Actually, I think I might have it in the, see if I can pull it up for us. I can't get that out of the way. Hey, there we go. Under the help area of ESHA Port, we actually have a command line parameters area of for ESHA Port. So you can call ESHA Port from the command line. So you type in the file extension inside of command line and determine what files you'd like to export out or what EPF file you'd like to call. And then this command line call can be scheduled using Windows has a built-in Windows command line call. So you can have it run every night, once a week, whenever you'd like it to run. So you can automate that process. And we have a little more information on that on our website, or our technical support team can help out with that process as well.
Wonderful. There's some great questions coming in. Next one would be, does ESHA Port support TIF files, TIF files?
Yes, let me confirm that, but I'm pretty sure it does. We can go into a new export. That would be a type of image file to export your labels out of. So when exporting the actual image of the label itself, we have our file type area here. It defaults to bitmap, but you can do a bitmap, a GIF, a TIFF, or a PNG as your export file structure. So you do have that option to export out.
Wonderful. Can you show us how to create a group? Because I know groups are pretty important using ESHA Port.
Absolutely, and that was something that I didn't mention that I was going to. We do have a webinar that we've conducted in the past, I believe last year, that went over a lot of grouping your items and how to create groups and how to organize things. So we do have that available on our site, but also when creating a new group, we just go into this database tab within Genesis, go to modify, click on groups, and then you can either create a group or a folder. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but basically when creating a new item here, a folder is a way to organize groups, and then a group, of course, is a way to organize items. So you can put groups inside of folders, and then ingredients and recipes inside of groups.
Great, wonderful. I think at this point, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. If we haven't gotten to your questions, we will certainly get back to you today. We've gotten some pretty detailed kind of what-if scenarios, so we want to make sure we put some time and thought into that. If you're interested in ESHA Port and you don't currently have it, please contact sales@esha.com. We also have a lot of information on our website, and we'll be following up with additional documentation as well. Thanks so much. We appreciate you attending today. We hope you all have a great day.